And today we're going to be talking about a story that has courage. Now, courage is one of those old-fashioned words that you read in about a lot of stories about heroes and knights in shining armor and King Arthur's table and whatever else legends we have coming through to us in TV or in our classrooms. For me, the word courage smells of Shakespeare, of old England, in times when people would do something dangerous, extreme dangerous, to actually prove that they had courage. I noticed that how we use the word courage today is much more when it comes to a fallen soldier or somebody who has died in the battle for someone living. Maybe even climbing Mount Everest, even though I question if that is always courage. It takes guts, that's for sure. But according to the Webster Dictionary, and as a student, I was always taught that you need to go to the dictionary to learn to define a word. And so I spent many hours in the dictionary when I was learning English. But according to Webster, the meaning of courage is strength of mind to carry on in spite of danger. So strength of mind to carry on in spite of danger. And there was a whole bunch of synonymous of courage that I'd never heard of. Some I heard of. Some of them were bravery, courageousness, daring, fearlessness, gallantry, great-heartedness, guts, heart, heroism, and nerve. That's a whole range of what courage means, doesn't it? Today, I don't see many knights of shining armor riding around on white horses, speaking like Shakespeare. But do I see courage around me today? Is it something we actually need to look at? Or is it just one of those old values that we can easily forget and put aside? But perhaps if I asked you today, do you have guts? Do you have heart in your life? Do you have guts to stand for something when you know your world is tumbling down? You might be able to relate. Because I know for many it takes guts to get behind the steering wheel for the first time and take the driver's test. I know for many it takes guts to walk into an exam room when you don't feel you are 100% prepared. It takes guts to in an interview say, I'm sorry, I do not work on the Sabbath day. And you know that you might not be picked for that job that you need. And it takes guts as a university student to go to your lectures and say, I'm sorry, I cannot do an exam on Sabbath. And knowing that you might actually fail and have to retake later on. Guts is something that we have and that is around us for many things. But today I want to actually go back to a really old story in the Bible that talks about having guts and courage. And we're looking in 2 Samuel chapter 21, verses 10 to 14. We're looking at one of the most tragic figures in the Bible. It's a figure of Rizpah. And most people have never heard her story because sadly she's one of those very forgotten heroes. But it's a story that the first time I came across it, it touched a core with my heart and my life. But the story reads like a good Hollywood production of plots, murders, revenge, and all kinds of gory details. But you throw in redemption to that story, and suddenly, with redemption and reconciliation, you have added God into an ordinary story. In 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 6, just a little bit before our scripture reading, we learn that Rizpah is a concubine. She's a slave. She's somebody's property. And not just any man's property. She's King Saul's property. That great, almighty, powerful king. It is to her that she belongs. When we look further back in 1 Samuel chapter 31, we know that at the time we encounter the story of Rizpah, Saul has already died a most gruesome death. Badly wounded by the Philistine archers, Saul fell on his own sword because he did not want to be humiliated. And the next day we read that the Philistines decapitated his corpse and fastened it to the public wall. That's very gory. But Saul's death places Rizpah in jeopardy. She's a slave and therefore she was his property. And she would, according to the law of the time, be passed on to the next male heir in line and join his harem. So she would move from being Saul's concubine to being Ishbaal's concubine. But he had other plans. And so he accuses the commander of Saul's army, Abner, that Abner has actually taken advantage of her, that he has raped her. Now, I need us to understand that the allegations has nothing to do with his care or his feelings for Rizpah, but it has to do with revenge. It has to do with power. Because accusing Abner for having defiled a property of the king is the same as actually accusing him of treason. For him to have raped Rizpah, who belonged to Saul, would be seen as treason and a plot to become king himself. Furious at the charge, furious that he's being wrongfully charged as something like this, Abner switches his loyalty from supporting Saul's descendants' claim to the throne to the house of David. But in all of this, the person who is Rizpah remains in the role of this helpless concubine, as an argument about her just escalates over her head. The charge of violation of her has nothing to do with her humanity or dignity, but a violation of the king's property. So the argument about her actually is not out of concern for what has happened to her, but it becomes an argument of power. And the war we read between the two houses, they rage. And this time, not just a little rage, but we read that there is a 3-year famine in the land. And that is eventually what pushes David into action. Now, we just got torrential rains today, but imagine we are out here surrounded by farm and fields. So imagine a 3-year drought, what that would do. 3 years famine coming across, living in that. So after 3 years, David turns to God and says, okay, God, what is it? Why? What can I do? What is it that needs to be done for this famine to cease? And God tells David that the reason for the famine is Saul's massacre on the Gibeonites, a people we read in verse 2 there in chapter 1 that Israel had sworn to spare. And David then went to the few survivors and asked, what can I do to make amends? What can I do for us to be good again? And it would have been nice if they said, well, let's give us a sum of money or give us some land. But no, they were not interested in any financial settlements. They were not interested in land. They wanted revenge. And they demanded 7 of Saul's sons to be killed. And David gave them 5 of Saul's grandsons and 2 of his own sons, the sons that he had with Rizpah, Ammoni and Mephibosheth. We read, and various translations put it differently, that these 7 men were killed. Some translations say they were hanged. We know that they were put to death at the first day of the barley harvest. Now, these men were killed on a hill outside of the town, and we read that their bodies were left to be exposed, meaning they were not buried. And tradition has it at this time, you have to be buried within 24 hours. It is both practical, it is both hygienic, but it is also respectful to bury somebody within 24 hours. That is a tradition. And not to bury these bodies is another layer of humiliation laid upon them. We can imagine the death being horrible. And yet, again we find Rizpah, the mother, helpless, consigned to be a helpless onlooker in the vengeance games of the powerful men around her. She is triply jeopardized, first as a concubine, then as a widow, and now as a mother without sons. There were no future for her in this time of history. Nobody to support her, which her sons would be doing. Concubine, a property, a widow, no husband or no partner either. So she was triply jeopardized, really, really at the bottom of everything. But Rizpah does something so amazing and courageous. So she is moved by her grief. She's moved by what has been done to her or against her. But in her grief, she refuses to remain merely a victim of her circumstances. She refuses to just be a spectator to the events and the power plays that are affecting her and her life. So alone in an act of defiance, she, the concubine, the slave, the woman whose name means glowing cold, she goes to the mountain on the hill outside of the town where the distorted and sun-scorched bodies of her beloved sons lie. We read there in verse 10 that she took sackcloth and spread it out for herself on a rock, and there she remained until the rains came again and the harvest was over. Now remember, it happened at the beginning of the barley harvest, and this is at the end of the harvest period. This is not for one day. This is not a weekend. This is not a week. This is for 5 long months. The mother is on the hill. She, who was a victim of the sins of the others, she is the one who made a vigil with sackcloth, which we know is a symbol of atonement. Imagine her out there on a rock outside the cities in her sackcloth, keeping the birds, the vultures away during the hot days and the wild animals away by night from those bodies as they rot and just go into the ground. Her sons, who had been so disgraced in this power game, for 5 months, she decides to keep watch. And I don't know how many mothers could do that. Stand as their bodies of their beloved sons are just decomposing, rotting away, and all that remains at the ends are the bare bones. Now, I don't think it was going to be a pleasant sight. And we can imagine, some of us can imagine what that might have looked like. But can you imagine the smell that would go with that? That would have been an awful 5 months to spend as a mother, day and night. What a vision she must have been. Weary with grief, and yet in the stifling heat of the day and the chilling air at night, she remained. Quivering with the fatigue and perhaps fear, she remained there out on the hill, protecting the remains of her son. Some people probably applauded her for being courageous, such an amazing, devoted mother. Others would have seen her as utterly barking mad. Some would even have pitied her. So they praised or pitied her, but never did she give up. And I believe that only God could have given her the courage to sustain and the determination and strength to persevere during this time. And then one morning she woke up, and mingling with her tears were the raindrops. She surely must have been the talk of the town. Surely. For King David eventually hears about her and her plead in verse 11, and he is moved. And he, as a result, gathers up the bones of Saul and Jonathan and those of whom Rizpah had kept watch. After having been out there for so long, he gathers Saul and his kin, and they were finally buried with honor. Now Rizpah, the pawn of vengeance and division between the houses of Saul and David, she becomes the reconciler. She, who is a victim of other sin, offers the sacrifice that moves God to open the heavens and return abundance to the land. Rizpah teaches us today that sometimes in life there are situations where we, like her, are caught up in situations beyond our own control. And sometimes we also fall victim to other people's power struggles. Rizpah has no voice in the story. She has not been given a voice, but her actions still speak loud and speak volume. Why stand guard for so long? Why not just bury the bones and cover in the cover of the night? But as a concubine, it was not her place. And as a woman, she was not allowed to do so. So all she could do was stand there and guard. But why not just, honestly, why not just go and sort it out behind the scene? Why make such a spectacle out of yourself? Rizpah's plea was not taken to the officials. Yet there was no doubt that they knew about it. How could they not? But because she was both a widow a mother with no sons and a concubine. She had nobody who would speak her case. There was nobody who would take her case to the court because there was no male who could go and speak for her. But she was probably also seen worthy, not seen worthy as having her cause brought in front of the justice system. So she stands alone for what she knows is right and honorable. And that, I think, is raw courage. She who has no one to speak her case, no one to looking after her welfare, as a concubine just tossed aside in aspiration for a throne, as a grieving mother, she has no one where to go, no one to turn to. But despite the despair of her situations and the apparent bleakness of her future, she takes a stand and stands for what she knows is right. Yes, she makes a spectacle of herself in the meantime. Yes, she is drawing attention to herself and the injustice of her situation. And it is not out of for a popularity vote that she is standing there. But she's standing there because she knows this is the right thing to do. And that takes courage. Courage that goes way beyond King Arthur's, Shakespeare's knights in shining armor riding around on white horses. Courage that when you lay yourself so open and vulnerable that you are risking all to stand in the place of justice, that is courage. And it would be nice if it finished there, but I want you to pay attention that Rizpah takes it even one step further. She takes it further than her personal grief because she also stands in the place of justice for those who have wronged her. How many of us are willing to stand for justice for those who have done us wrong? To stand alone there and endure the coldness day and night for what we know is right, even for those who have done us wrong. Sadly, no one fought for Rizpah. And sometimes that's the situation we are in too. Sadly, nobody stands up for what they know is right or stands up for us, despite everyone around them, us knowing that this is the right. Rizpah stands alone for half a year, and she does not give up until justice is done. How long are we willing and prepared to stand alone for what we believe is right? How long? A day? I don't know, but I find Rizpah amazingly courageous. But another thing that the story of Rizpah also does, it brings into us the whole eschatology that we as Adventists also believe in, because it reminds us of the greater battle between good and evil, between God and Satan, where like Rizpah, you and I are caught between the powers, and we cannot change the outcome on a cosmic level. But like Rizpah, we have the free will in this country to stand courageously for what is right. And we always have the option of standing for justice. And she reminds me also that in this cosmic war, we have a hope. We have hope of redemption because Christ came to this earth to reconcile us with God the Father through his own sacrifice for our sins, that we can stand in grace and be saved. And that hope is what enables us. That hope is what gives us courage to step into our own future, to knowing that whatever God brings us, or whatever life brings us, we worship a God who strengthened Rizpah with courage to stand. A God who told Joshua as he stood at the edge of the promised land, "Have I not commanded you," in Joshua 1, "to be strong and courageous? Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." And that resonates with us today, because we need to be encouraged to actually step forward in courage, to not be terrified or discouraged, but be reminded that God is with us wherever we go. That God has shown us in all of this how we are to respond to life around us. Micah chapter 6 says that very clearly. The Lord has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And living like that, to act justly like Rizpah, to love mercy like Rizpah as well, and to walk humbly with our God like Rizpah does. Living like that today takes courage. To be merciful, to act justly, and to stand for what is right. And I really pray that whatever struggle or wherever you're finding yourself in, because we are kidding ourselves as a church if we really believe that everybody has a nice and rosy life. People struggle, and people go through struggles that you don't even know about. And I think it is in that we need to take courage of some of the Bible stories like Rizpah, who shows us that there is a possibility to stand for what is right. It is not popular, but it is the right thing to do. And God is asking us, some of us, it takes courage to follow him into the life he wants us to lead. But God is asking us to step forward in courage, to know that he will go with us whatever we face. I believe that God was on that mountain hill with Rizpah, that he gave her the strength. I don't know what mountain hill you are standing on. I don't know what desert you're wandering in, but I know that God is there with you and standing with you and sustaining you and helping you to see a way forth, whatever that may be for you. And it is just my prayer that you as a church here in Swindon will be known for people who stand for what is right, but also to have the courage to be faithful in all we do. So be strong and courageous. Don't be terrified or discouraged. When we hit that discouragement, remember to come together in fellowship and share and support one another and remind each other of the hope that we have in the everlasting God, the King of Kings, the one whose banqueting table we're going to be sitting at when this life is over. But until then, let's stand for justice and let's stand in courage. Amen.
Amen.